everyone, or morning from where I am, afternoon and lunchtime from where everyone else is. Um, I'd like to thank you for attending today's session, our Lunch and Learn, and I'm going to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet and today. The lands I'm on are the Wadandi Noongar people's lands, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that to any elders in the areas that you are meeting us on today. We extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on the webinar with us as well. So these lunch and learns are delivered by the Centre for Inclusive Employment in partnership with us at Disability Employment Australia. The centre supports providers with practical resources, tools and training to help deliver high quality employment services for people with disability and employers. DEA is the national peak body representing disability employment providers, and the centre is delivered by a national consortium led by the Centre for Social Impact at Swinburne University of Technology, bringing together research, lived experience and sector expertise. Just moving on to some housekeeping at the moment. We are having live captions provided by Expressions Australia, and Helen is with us today providing that service. Liv is our DEA event guru and will be monitoring the webinar today and will be in the chat. So she is going to provide some more instructions in the chat regarding those captions. And we are recording this webinar today. So you can view that on the online hub along with the slides and a transcript. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our presenters today. Lucy Solonsch is the Senior Programs and Training Coordinator for Children and Young People with Disability, and Julia Coscolluela is the Project Officer for Children and Young People with Disability Australia. So CYDA are a national peak representing children and young people across Australia. There will be an opportunity to ask some questions in the Q&A post the presentation. You are welcome to utilise the chat as well, and we'll be monitoring that throughout. So I'll hand over to you, Lucy and Julia.
Thanks, Renee. And I'd like to also just kind of begin by acknowledging that I'm on Kaurna land today in Adelaide, and that CYDA's offices are based on Wurundjeri land of the people of the Kulin Nation. I'll just get my screen share going for everyone. And now that that is there, we should be good to get into things. So, before we get into actually talking about the steps to take to prepare young people with disability for employment, I just want to start with some of the fundamentals of why employment for young people and starting at the right age is so important. In some of CYDA's previous work on this, we've heard from young people that there's an incredible impact on general sense of belonging, inclusion, and well-being, and that meaningful employment enables independence, ensuring that people can have safe access to the services they need, that they can access things like appropriate housing, medications, and healthcare, and recognizing the discrimination faced by young people with disability, the inclusion of young people with disability in employment and in the workplace really goes towards normalizing the experiences of young people with disability. It also has a really significant impact on our sense of self and our self-worth. Personally, so I'm 27 And back when I was 23, because of my disability, I had about a year of being in really significant period of underemployment. Um, During this time, there were multiple organizations that I was lucky enough that did want to work with me, but only wanted me to be involved for short-term projects and casual roles, things that didn't lead to me having a sustainable life and lifestyle, and that really affected kind of, my personal finances and kind of material stability. But also, and this is something that really sticks with me when I reflect on that time, as someone who's always been passionate about working in community services and working in advocacy, supporting people like myself, whether that be as a disabled person, as a young-ish person, as a member of the LGBTIQA plus community, and someone with psychosocial disability. Um, a lot of what kind of gives me meaning and a sense of purpose and drive has been in that ability and opportunity to help others, which is something that unfortunately, due to the lack of opportunities that for meaningful, kind of consistent employment that I was getting, really had an impact on my self-worth as a whole. Feeling that what I was kind of here to do and what means so much to me, what gives me that sense of worth and fulfillment is something that I wasn't actually able to kind of take part of, where it, yeah, just had a really deep impact on my well-being, my mental health, and my ability to practice self-care as well, which led to for a while, a worsening of my disability. So there's a really big kind of personal impact to the discrimination of young people with disability employment settings that I feel. Um, and it's something where, for me, I look at what was really basic policies around not being supported to work from home, not being supported to work from an office because I didn't have a driver's license. And a lot of jobs have that baked in, even when travel isn't actually a necessary part of the role. So it was these really simple things that led to me getting this message from society, from employers, not intentionally, but kind of collectively, getting this message that I wasn't meant to do the things I wanted to do, and that I wasn't meant to do the things that gave me well-being and gave me a sense of meaning. So it is, yeah, a deeply important area. And the flip side of that is when those opportunities are present, they're so, so important. And I want to hand to my colleague Julia to tell you about what one of those experiences was like for her as a young person with a disability as well.
Julia speaking. Thanks so much for sharing, Lucy. And to kind of, when we're talking about preparing disabled young people for work, I think that we often focus on fixing the young people or like focusing on what sort of skills they need in order to be able to be work ready. But I also think it's really important that we keep in mind that disabled young people should also be given opportunities to learn, not just be expected to be perfectly work ready before they even begin employment. Sometimes what we really need is people who are already in our corner. So things like people like teachers or managers or teammates who are willing to trust us and willing to support us and give us a chance to grow and actually practice the skills that we would need in a workplace. When I was 18, I was very, very fortunate to be offered a role at my local council working for their youth services team. And besides having a high school diploma and my lived experiences, I really didn't have any formal qualifications or any significant work history. But at 18, I was already very capable in some ways, but also still deeply uncertain in others. So, for example, while I was really into volunteering and advocacy, and that was a big reason why my local council hired me, I was also really, really, really anxious. I struggled a lot with general anxiety and social anxiety, and just struggled a lot with my confidence and often doubted myself as well. And I remember constantly wondering if I was good enough. I was surrounded by all these professional people who had all these qualifications and work histories, and I was just kind of there, super new to the whole concept of being in a professional working environment in the first place. And I was really nervous about behaving the correct way. And, what if everyone realizes that I actually don't know what I'm doing most of the time? And to be honest, I really didn't know what I was doing most of the time. And like I said, that was the first time I'd ever worked in a professional environment. I didn't even understand things like what an agenda was or how to take minutes. But what made this experience so positive and so life-changing for me, despite everything that I didn't know about working, was that the people around me didn't expect me to know everything immediately. My manager and my teammates all supported me in their own ways, so they took time to train me and explain different things. They let me ask questions without shame, and they also gave me plenty of opportunities to try things that I hadn't tried before. And most importantly, they trusted me with real responsibility. So when I was first offered the role, I fully expected that my job would be to print documents and get people's coffee orders and do all the little mundane tasks that no one wants to do. But that is not what they had me do at all. They had me actually running and helping deliver different youth programs. They had me designing workshops, community events, helping with petitions, social media campaigns, digital content creation, newsletters, and like so much more. And because they had so much faith in me and what I could do, I even went on to work in other parts of council, like other teams, like supporting, for example, council's response to COVID-19 pandemic and like increasing vaccination rates and that sort of stuff. All with like a high school diploma and a really, really great attitude, I guess. And this trust that these people had in me, like, really changed how I saw myself, and really gave me the confidence to believe that I can do things. And working at council, really challenged a lot of the internalized beliefs that I had about myself, especially around how I don't deserve to like be employed in a certain way, or because of my disabilities, like I'm not going to be a very good team member. And the experience actually opened up many doors to other meaningful opportunities for work, which was really, really great. Um, so when we talk about understanding employment for young people with disability, um, the statistics show us that the employment rate for young people with disability have only grown 5% over the past 20 years, and fewer than half of all disabled young people are employed. And young people with disability are 25% less likely to participate in the labor force. And the unemployment rate for young people with disability is more than double the rate for young people without disability. Um, so unfortunately, this just kind of shows that experiences like mine aren't as common as they should be, and that the gap between the employment rate of young people and young people with disability is actually increasing as while we're creating more opportunities for young people to work, young people with disability often aren't being accommodated in this. So we're going to talk now about preparing young people with disability for employment. And preparing often starts in education, so at school. Unfortunately, accommodations for students with disability are often described as inconsistent or inadequate. And if we look at the current statistics, seven in every 10 young people with disability face exclusion and bullying in school. And less than half of young people with disability with individual education plans are involved in developing these plans. And only 1/3 of young people with disability feel their school has a supportive and inclusive culture. So when young people are already finding themselves in these environments at school where they're not being supported, it makes it harder for them to find meaningful employment and to know like what to expect from an employer and have the confidence to like advocate for what they need. I'll hand it over to Lucy.
Absolutely. So on the screen here, you can see the Polished Pathway, which was a great piece of research by Inclusion Australia, really documenting this impact of a lack of inclusion in schooling, setting people up with low expectations, not giving them the opportunities to develop and build skills, which lead to young people as they move into the workforce, continuing to, of course, not have those opportunities, continuing to not have that self-belief about capability and the fact that if accommodations are made, they can be highly productive and can contribute to the workforce in the same ways that other folk can. Now, personally, there's a bit of an experience I reflect on when it comes to this as well. Um, so back when I was in high school, there were kind of two main places that people with disability, in my school at least, ended up. There was a separated off schooling environment, with their own building, fenced off from the rest of the school, their own play area, where they weren't able to kind of connect with the mainstream. And then there was students like myself with invisible disabilities who were allowed into the mainstream, but not really considered in how the school was actually set up and structured and whether it would meet our needs or not. Now, because of that passion I mentioned about kind of health and community services, when I was in year 10, I was asked to join a peer mentoring program that the school had to engage with the students with disability who were off in that other part of the school. And during that time, it made me realize that, as a 15, 16-year-old, despite having a disability myself, I wasn't really exposed to many opportunities to engage with other young people with disability. I wasn't really given opportunities to consider what their lives might be like, what they might be experiencing or struggling with, and that to an extent, I just didn't know, hadn't been given the opportunity to learn how to interact with them. And I think about that in the other way around, where when those students who were put off on that other side of the school and not given those opportunities to interact with the mainstream, also weren't given the opportunity to learn how to participate and how to interact in the rest of society and the rest of that schooling environment. And what that did to their expectations for themselves, their feelings and beliefs about the way they would or wouldn't get to participate in society, when a lot of those students were, I mean, fundamentally regular people, not that different from me. And when each of them, of course, had their own skills, capabilities, and interests, and that over the year I was in that peer role, I got to find that, I got to engage with them and learn that. And knowing that there were only so limited moments for those young people to actually connect to that, to explore that, that it was something presented almost as a treat, as a nice thing they get to do a little bit of, as opposed to just being an expectation, and without coming back to that fundamental basis on rights and the fact that education and employment in open, meaningful ways is something that people with disability, as per the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disability, are entitled to. It really shows that absence. And we know that, unfortunately, that absence is a common experience and it has real impacts. There's some quotes on screen from some of our submissions, young people sharing their lack of inclusion, feeling or not feeling like they could be open and honest about who they are, including their disabilities, or being in environments where things look promising until they disclose that they have a disability, where all of a sudden they find doors closing on them. And we know that experiences like that make it so that people are less likely to continue seeking out opportunities. Because if this is the experience that they're having, if this is the consistent message they're getting from a young age where in schooling, as they're growing up, they're not being taught to have high expectations. And then when they start trying to participate more broadly in society, they're not being given the opportunity to actually make use of the skills they do have. of course, you're going to have that impact on motivation, on self-worth, on self-belief. As I said, I had it myself in a year when I was underemployed. That's only more significant for people whose lives are unfortunately structured in a way where that's a constant theme. Now, I want to change terms a little bit here, change focuses, and share about one of the programs which CYDA has previously ran to create meaningful pathways. Back in 2014, 2015, we partnered with Social Ventures Australia on the Employer Innovation Lab. This was a 9 month long program working with 8 organizations, a mix of both public and private sector, blue collar and white collar organizations, where we had a kickoff meeting, well, not just a meeting, a 2 day workshop where we brought in managers and senior leaders at these organizations to help them understand the barriers that young people with disability face to employment and help them understand the ways that their policies and procedures weren't enabling and creating opportunities for young people with disability. From there, we had them develop plans about what they might be able to adjust and change in their own workplaces to fix that, whether that was changing job advertisements, whether that was starting with just understanding what their current workforce looks like so that they know who actually is in the workforce, what are they doing well and what are they missing. Um, Giving these organizations then the opportunity, once they came up with those ideas, the chance to bring those to young people with disability and say, hey, this is what we're thinking about changing, or this is what we want to better understand for our organization. Is there anything missing? And at CYDA, we're lucky enough to have a great team of youth casuals and youth consultants who were able to point out that sometimes there were issues in those original pilot plans. But alongside the rest of us in the project team across CYDA and Social Ventures Australia, we were then able to work with these organizations to not just adjust those plans, but then walk through implementing them with regular coaching sessions across that 9 months. During the evaluation of that program, we know that 8 young people with disability were employed. And having been in contact with the organization since, I know that that number is now closer to 17. Um, so that's one where we can see that there's changes that we can make at any level, whether that is organizationally or when it's engaging directly with young people with disability. I can just see a comment from my friend Simon in the chat. Great to hear from you, and it was a lovely experience working on the lab, absolutely. Um, so, we also have experience working directly with young people with disability to build that confidence. Because, of course, as we said, a lot of it starts with that element of confidence and opportunity that begins from a young age. Back in 2023 through to 2024, we were running the Dream Network. This was a network for young people with disability to attend workshops, access, and be involved in designing resources for young people with disability and for employers to really outline what their needs were, what's working for young people with disability, and what's not. And something that I always come back to from the Dream Network is that when we talk to young people to learn what they want from a workplace, it's an inclusive, respectful, supportive culture. It's that employees are remunerated fairly, that workplace trainings are offered, that employees have the opportunity to learn and develop, that the business is well run, that employees feel like they belong, and that access needs are met. Now, for me, those all look like things that any worker wants from their workplace. So I really think that it speaks to the fact that what young people with disability in employment are looking for is an opportunity the same way anyone else seeking employment is looking for that opportunity. And we were glad through the Dream Network to have built young people with disabilities confidence and to have ran networking sessions connecting them to employers. So, with all that, I'll hand to Jules to talk a bit more about some of the steps employment providers can take to put things into practice and build that confidence and opportunity.
Julia speaking. Thanks so much, Lucy. So for employment providers, we put together a few tips that are important to keep in mind so that you can give meaningful opportunities for work to young people with disability. The first is to don't assume and don't fall back on stereotypes and to actually ask questions and invite people to ask questions as well. It's really important that a person with disability is an individual and that someone with a certain diagnosis isn't necessarily going to have the same access needs as another person with that same diagnosis. So remembering the person in front of you, um, and just centering that rather than falling back on stereotypes. The next is to help them find their purpose or passion and understand how work enables that. So being able to connect the role that they've got with you to what their actual values are and what they want out of life and what really drives them helps to create a meaningful work opportunity. Looking for real opportunities, not just menial tasks or young people jobs, just like social media. Something that like I've noticed is that there are like a few places out there who have really great intentions and want to engage more young people and young people with disability, but then they end up with jobs like, oh, you look after our social media page, you look after our Instagram. But there is so much more to an organization than just your Instagram page or your Facebook page. So actually asking that young person what their interests are, and looking for opportunities within your different teams to see like where a young person would be able to contribute meaningfully. Respectful engagement. So something like based on my own lived experiences, a lot of young people's, or at least my first job was at um, at a fast food place. It was like a customer service job. And a lot of these entry-level jobs often set up some really negative expectations of what a workplace is like and what respectful professional communication looks like. So keeping in mind that when you're engaging with a young person, you are very likely going to be one of their first exposures to what it means to being an employee or being in the workforce. And it's really important that you treat them with respect, um, and that you kind of like set a standard for what they should expect from their employers. And the last is turning best practice into business as usual. So really creating like a workplace culture um, where inclusion and creating like meaningful opportunities for young people are already like it's just part of like business, like it's just part of your day to day, and it's not like a special 3-month project. And then afterwards, that young person is like never to be seen again. But actually putting it into your policies and procedures, your recruitment practices, and all that. Yeah, Lucy, would you like to add anything else to this?
Um, the only thing that I'd add is for people working more in the connecting roles in things like Inclusive Employment Australia, that it's still important to go back to those fundamentals. And that I understand it can be really easy in what is a very KPI-driven environment a lot of the time to want to fall back on shortcuts and making those assumptions. And that being in an environment that can incentivize that, it makes sense for that to be the response. But that every time you're doing that, you're missing an opportunity to potentially ask a meaningful question and to gain more of that fuller understanding of what kinds of employment opportunities your clients might be looking for, or to understand where their skills actually lie and what their access needs really are, to properly identify what workplaces are the best fit. For employers, along with some of what we already touched on that applies for both employment providers and employers themselves, young people with disability want open communication and clarity throughout recruitment processes. So, for example, sharing that we'll go to an interview and then after the interview, we'll have you do a written task so that young people understand what they're signing up for. contacting unsuccessful applicants. It's so common for not even an automated email to be sent out. And not as though those automated emails are ideal, but for people to just not be told at all what those next steps are or if they'll be continuing along in a recruitment process. For employers, having accessibility information on their website is something that we know young people with disability look for to tell if a workplace is going to be right for them. Just like they look to see if workplaces have disability inclusion statements or disability action plans, and if they do have them, if they're easy to find. Finally, communicating what the job and job interviews involve and any recommended steps to prepare for them, and sharing a willingness to learn and respond to feedback from young people with disability about the process. These are all things that we heard through the Dreaming Network, engaging directly with young people with disability on what they're looking for. Now, we also know that, as we touched on at the start, having that continued opportunity to set expectations and create expectations for young people with disability that, like anyone else, young people with disability should be able to access safe, meaningful work opportunities really starts at that basic level of creating environments where people can learn from mistakes. Because if you're creating places for people to learn from mistakes, it means you have to be giving them opportunities to learn. Avoiding that trap of low expectations and being person-centered and strength-based. So using the social model and human rights models of disability to guide your practices. So that means thinking about what in your environment or in your policies you can change, because the disability itself isn't the issue. The person with disability is absolutely not the issue. Issues of accessibility are issues of our environments not being made to fit and work for people with disability. And when you run into barriers, when you run into things that don't make sense or don't feel like they're working, asking questions and asking, what if we can change this? What if we had an opportunity to do something else instead? And obviously, there's so much education and development that can be done to support the inclusion of people with disability and young people with disability in the workplace. CYDA do offer a range of trainings that we're happy for people to reach out about. Or if you just like our resources, we'll share them in the chat at the moment, in just a moment, but we'll also make sure those are available elsewhere. So thank you for this, and I believe we'll now be heading into questions.
Thanks, Lucy and Julia. That was an excellent presentation. I know I got a lot out of it. There have we got some things in the chat? I'd like to ask a question, and I'm going to be brave and not write in the chat and just ask in case it prompts anyone else to come off screen and ask themselves as well. I just want to know the research you've done, and I think we all can relate and understand that low expectation and the work that we need to do has to start from the beginning. So, I often fall back on the research that says a young child with a disability is not asked those common questions as they're growing up, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Just something as simple as that. I wonder, in the work that you've done, have you found that there is an appetite for schools and families and service providers to want that change to happen? And therefore, is it the system that's a barrier, or are you finding there's still a little bit of both?
Yeah, Lucy speaking. That is a really good question. I think that An unfortunate kind of part to how this works is that that trap of low expectations is kind of self-perpetuating. It fuels itself. So when we're getting, say, messages from media and in policy that young people with disability aren't going to have the opportunities to, yeah, kind of explore what they might want to do for employment and consider it. That means then families, employment providers, support people, and young people themselves aren't necessarily recognizing as much that thinking about that's even an option. So I think it's one of those ones where ultimately work on it is needed at all levels, where it's something that in education, in employment sectors, in just general discussion, reminding people and creating that understanding that, as silly as it seems to say, yes, people with disability, people with complex disability do still have their own complex individual worlds, goals, wants, needs, and identities, is something that everyone really does need to come back to. And I know that sometimes we can fall into a bit of a trap where when something's everyone's responsibility, it can also be no one's. That's why we have things like the inclusive education roadmap supporting educators along that process, why we have things like the Dream Resources supporting employers to know what steps they can take.
Yeah. We do have a couple of questions here. I'm just sorry, it's flicking. I'm losing some of the text. I'll implement, thank you. Is there a way we can better resource schools to assist with early intervention related to employment? This question's from Kathy Whittam.
That's a really good question. And I think that there's a lot of schools that are doing well in regards to generally preparing young people for employment, in regards to programs once people are at kind of year 10, year 11, so between 14 and 16 years old, that are there to set up young people to develop resumes and do work experience. But those opportunities aren't necessarily being extended towards young people with disability. So I think that sometimes it's not even necessarily about putting more resourcing in place. It's just about recognizing that we already have some resources, some approaches and structures that we know work, or at least that we know are working, and that we can put those into place for everyone, as opposed to just having them in place for some schools and some parts of schooling, but not all of them.
Julia speaking. If I could share an experience, I remember back in high school going into the bathroom, and at the back of the bathroom stall there was a poster advertising a public speaking program that the local council was running. And totally random thing, but I would have no idea that program would kind of be the start of me being involved in the community. So when it comes to like schools and how they can better support young people in um, gaining access to meaningful employment, like at a really early stage, it's just letting them be aware of all these opportunities that exist out there where they can develop their soft skills. So in this particular example, it's like public speaking, like learning how to talk to people, which was very, very scary for my 15-year-old socially anxious self. But it also helped me build more skills, and build up my confidence so that I'd eventually be able to do things like talk in front of like 100 people right now. Um, and just, yeah, just being aware that there are like many organizations out there that provide these opportunities where young people can build these skills. It would be really good if schools were just aware of like the different offerings in their area and be willing to share that with their young people and encourage them to apply for it as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Julia. One last question until we're going to have to wind it up after that. So, uh, how can training providers online provide services to young people with disability?
I think that that's one that I'd probably need a bit more context to give kind of a richer answer to. I think that ultimately, if you're an online training provider, the first thing is just checking and making sure that your training programs and training platform is accessible. Making sure that the website is able to be navigated through tab navigation, making sure that you've got alt text so that if there's anything on images, people are able to access those. Making sure that the interface itself works at that fundamental level is definitely the first step.
Okay, great. Thank you. I've just been given notification that we can go to a couple more questions, so I'll just go to the next one. Young people can often not want to engage with entry-level roles. How do key stakeholders overcome disengagement?
Julia, not to put you in the hot seat, but I feel like you might have some thoughts on that one.
Yeah, Julia speaking. I hope that this is like I'm understanding this question correctly. I think that a lot of entry level roles tend to have really mundane or like menial tasks attached to them. And what made like my experience with council so meaningful is that they didn't just make me go and get people's coffee or anything like that. If anything, like my manager kept asking if I wanted to have a coffee, and I'm like, I don't drink coffee. They actually trusted me to do things that I didn't even trust myself to be able to do. So things like facilitating workshops or even designing a program. I had no idea what a project brief was, but that didn't stop my manager from saying, Julia, would you like to design this program for high schoolers with a disability and blah, 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 blah. And I just said yes, because, if this person with all these years of experience believes in me, like, why can't I believe in myself? And because I was supported through that process, I was eventually able to like have more independence and also have more uh, ability to like run programs on by myself and like design things by myself and be able to say, yep, this is how I do a project brief. This is how like I see a project from the start to the end of it. So when it comes to like, yeah, like having more young people engage with entry level roles, it's making sure that the responsibilities that you're giving them are actually challenging them as well. So like believing that they can do these things with the right support. I hope that answers your question. Did you want to add anything to that, Lucy?
Yeah, the only other things that I'd probably add are thinking about the ways that you can help draw that connection, where if the role itself maybe isn't fulfilling and there's not much that you can change from your position in regards to what the kind of tasks in the role are. It can be about helping make that connection between, okay, what does doing this enable? How does doing this let you do other meaningful things? How does it give you opportunities that can later help you access roles that might be more interesting if that's what the person's seeking out? Otherwise, how does it let the young person access and do things in their personal life that are meaningful and that still provide that? I think that it can be easy to fall into that kind of trap of thinking that everyone needs to get meaning from their job. But for some people, and I think it's actually a very healthy skill to be able to develop and be okay with, being in a job that allows you to do the other things that you'd like to do in life outside of the job itself. So focusing a bit more on how the job enables that is definitely something. Another thing can be challenging them to find ways to maybe, almost gamify a job a little bit. Okay, maybe it's a bit of a challenge of you've got to make all these coffees, you've got all these orders coming in. Go, okay, I want to see how quickly I can get through all these without burning the coffee, of course. And that, encouraging people to find ways to just deal with that mundanity by finding something to make it fun and interesting by being a bit playful with it.
Thank you, ladies. Excellent answers. There's some really great questions in here, and we're not going to get to the rest of them, but there's some really valuable questions in the chat. So I'm sure we can get those questions to you, and can we get perhaps one of you or both of you to answer them through the resource section. So that winds up our webinar today. I just want to thank Lucy and Julia for your time today from CYDA. It was an excellent presentation, great ideas, pointing us in the right direction for some additional resources. And just for me, it's always, you know why you do what you do, but it's always great to reignite that passion and connect with others who have that like-mindedness, and so we can all be working together to see some effective change for young people with disability. Thank you, Helen, our captioner today. Thank you, Liv, for coordinating everything, and I bid you good day and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks for having us, and thanks for all the great questions, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.